You may know that at Eden Valley we see a lot of patients with cancer. And as much as it's nice to be able to do things for patients once they have cancer, it's so much better to have avoided it. So we want to talk a lot about prevention here today. So we'll be talking about causes, and I'm going to try to stand here where I can focus my pointer up on things. The picture you see here is actually from the front of Iowa Sanitarium. Iowa Sanitarium was in Nevada, Iowa, and my great-grandfather was the physician there. This was one of the Adventist sanitariums back in the, 20s. And they would often cure people that were given up on by Mayo Clinic. And so we find that the sanitariums have quite an edge because, not because we're super duper, but because we have a super duper God. Amen. And as long as we can be in alignment with His way of doing things, then He's freer to be able to work for people. But hope for cancer. Now, I don't know if you can see that, but we have a carrot cake there. And there's a carrot on top, and you got your frosting. And I was watching a baker make this carrot cake. And he started with a big bowl, and he put in a whole gallon of oil. Then he put in a gallon of sugar. And then he put in a gallon of eggs. And then he put in a gallon of flour. And I was watching for another scoop of flour, but that was all the more flour there was in there. I'm thinking, this thing isn't even half flour. I had sort of been of the impression before this that, if you're going to eat cake, you better eat carrot cake, because obviously the carrots have some nutrition in them. But I was getting an education here. Then he put in a scoop of other stuff, nuts and carrots and so forth, and the baking powder and what all, and he put it in the oven. Then he went to work on the frosting. And was he ever proud of his frosting? This was cream cheese frosting, no less, with vanilla that he himself had secured down in Colombia. Personally flew down there, and he claimed to have the best vanilla in town. Well, interestingly enough, this was not necessarily his main job. Actually, his real job was, he was my partner at the hospital. And he'd put together this bakery to give his son something to do. And he was capable of making the most exotic desserts, and if we had a staff party at the hospital, he could fill a whole table full of stuff from all over the world and fancy desserts. Well, I was back in the old town and up in Maine and looking around, and I picked up one of the newspapers that was edited by one of my previous patients, and I looked through the newspaper, and all of a sudden I came across this interesting plaque. It said, in honor of Dr. Donald Kelvoda, the treasured orthopedic surgeon at Parkview Adventist Medical Center, passed away July. I was like, I didn't know he was sick. I wonder what he died of. Did he get run over by a car? And so I was walking around town. I saw one of the other physicians, and I said, hey, I saw this thing in the paper. Dr. Kelvoda died. I said, what did he die of? He said he died of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Cancer. I was shocked. Interesting. Non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. Now, when I was practicing with him, we had a room where we had both of our desks. And I was doing this kind of work on the side, giving lectures, and he was sort of like, thumbing his nose at my interesting health lectures. Now he's dead. Well, how do you get non-Hodgkin's lymphoma? Well, you're looking at a lot of it right there. You wipe out your immune system with sugar, you get dairy products that contain all the viruses, and your incidence of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma goes up by 60%. And so we do it to ourselves in interesting ways. And here's my partner. He was like 58 years old, and, cancer has surpassed heart disease as the number one cause of death for Americans under the age of 85. Everybody here probably knows somebody who has had cancer or has cancer or died of cancer. In the year 1900, only 3% of death certificates listed cancer as a cause of death. How have we come so far? This year there'll probably be 500,000 people die of cancer. And so we have to figure something has changed and we're doing something that is contributing to this. But what is it? Maybe we'd be well advised to figure it out and get on top of it. Now, there are several different things that will cause cancer. And I don't know, can you turn out these front lights and make it a little dimmer over those slides? I don't know if it'd make a difference or not. Anyway, all right, and so we have several different things that contribute to cancer. But you have to know that in cancer, what happens is your DNA that tells your cell what to do gets changed. That DNA is like a computer program. Once the computer program is changed, well, you know, in a computer, your computer can go haywire with a virus. Well, once the computer program is changed in your cells, then they become cancer. Things that can change that computer program are like mutations, and those mutations can be caused by chemicals, carcinogenic chemicals, can be caused by viruses or bacteria, and can be caused by radiation, and then there's some heredity. That's sort of the book answer. And then if we divide it up by causes and actual lifestyle causes, we find that refined diet and obesity, inactivity contribute about 30%. Alcohol, tobacco, and caffeine about 30%. Hormones, meat, and chemicals about 20%. And then viruses and bacteria another 20%. Now there's a few odd things that I don't want you to get stuck too much on, but that's pollution and your job, your occupation. So what is the answer? How are we going to fix this? If everybody's coming down with cancer, we better figure out how to avoid it. Otherwise, we become one of the statistics. Well, let's start with one of the most important things, and that is the connection with protein. How many have seen the film Forks Over Knives? Yes, and in there, T. Colin Campbell talks about his own research where animal protein increases your risk of cancer. All in all, if you're on a low-protein diet, that would be 5% of your calories coming from protein, then your risk of cancer is very low. If you're getting 25% of your diet as protein, like eating a lot of animal products, then your risk of cancer goes up dramatically. In fact, it makes it so your cancer is more likely to spread to the liver and to the lungs. And so we don't want to get too much protein. I'm going to just use protein here for a little bit as our model, and then we'll go on to sugar and fat and so forth and see how they affect it. But your protein is definitely part of the problem. If you're eating red meat and dairy, big sources of protein, it doubles your risk of, say, prostate cancer. Doubles the risk. A lot of people wonder, why did I get prostate cancer? Well, the answer isn't too far away. And then if you're just eating red meat alone, it increases the risk by 66%. And so protein has quite an effect. Even milk protein. In fact, T. Colin Campbell was using milk protein. And when he used milk protein with his laboratory animals, it tripled the rates of cancer. You see, milk is made to grow a little calf to big calf in about 3 or 4 months. And then that calf will not drink milk the rest of its life. We're the only species that seems to use another species' baby food, and we try to use it our whole lives. But that particular product is made to make cells grow, to make everything flourish, to make things double in a short amount of time. And it's got all the hormones and the growth factors and stimulants to make this happen. What's more, milk wipes out your white cells that are involved in fighting cancer. These white cells are called natural killer cells, and if they quit working, then your risk of all kinds of diseases, and including cancer, goes way up. So milk is part of the problem. Remember, we said my partner was making cream cheese frosting, and a lot of desserts have sugar and milk in it. Cheese is no better. 4-year study in Italy showed that if people ate a lot of cheese, their risk of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, that disease that my partner died of, goes up by 66%. And so these products are harboring some of the causes of cancer. On the other hand, guess what? Tomatoes. They fight cancer. Tomatoes are full of what phytochemical? You've heard it on the news probably. Starts with an L. Lycopene. the red coloring. I mean, watermelon has it too, but this lycopene will make it so that you have a lot lower risk of prostate cancer. Cancer is also the mouth, esophagus, stomach, colon, and rectum. Yeah, but if all you ate was tomatoes, where would you get your protein? We know there's been a lot of misconceptions about protein perpetrated largely by the animal product industry. If we took 100 calories of different foods, here's what the outcome would be. Beef, for 100 calories of beef, it's 17% protein. For 100 calories of tomatoes, it's 17% protein. Broccoli is 29% protein if you take 100 calories. And so you can get more protein, good protein, more bioavailable protein from vegetables per calorie than you can with meat. Now, one thing I'm not telling you there, of course, is that meat's calories come largely from fat. So it doesn't take a lot of meat to make 100 calories. It would take a lot of tomatoes to get 100 calories. But all the same, there's plenty of protein there. Now, let's talk about fat a little bit. When we look at a high-fat diet compared to a low-fat diet, and we're looking at skin cancer, if you're on a high-fat diet, you triple your risk of skin cancer. Now, wait a minute. I thought skin cancer was due to, like too much sun. And if I put on my sunblock lotion, I'm good. Well, not so. In fact, the sunblock lotions often have mineral oil and sodium lauryl sulfate that will increase your risk of skin cancer. And the way you want to avoid skin cancer is by cutting down on the oils, cutting down on the fats. I mean, a high-fat diet triples your risk of dying of prostate cancer. And cancers are often pushed on by a high-fat diet. There's a number of reasons for that, and we'll get to it here shortly. But notice that the more fat people eat in their diet, the higher the death rate from breast cancer. For example, here's the United States. We get a lot of fat in our diet, and broccoli doesn't have a lot of fat. So it's coming from something that's high in fat, probably animal products. And since we get a lot of fat in our diet, we have a high death rate from breast cancer. And notice that all the countries sort of line up on the line. Here's Japan down here, low fat intake, low death rate from breast cancer. But those Japanese, they moved to LA, they moved to Hawaii, and in a couple of generations, they're right up here with the rest of the best of us, eating a high-fat diet and dying at the same rate, too, with breast cancer. There's nothing protective in their genes. It's just that the Japanese diet back home doesn't use a lot of processed oils or animal oils. And speaking of processed oils, you thought you were safe if you're using coconut oil or olive oil or sunflower seed oil. Using these vegetable oils quadruples your risk of breast and stomach cancer. These bottled oils are not the answer. It wasn't until the industrial age where we could squeeze oil out of everything that we came up with all these bottles of oils to buy on the shelf at the supermarket. But today we are paying the price. Cancer, autoimmune diseases. Autoimmune diseases are up by 50% in the last 10 years. And oil plays a huge role in that. Other processed foods do too. So don't get deceived that there's one oil better than the other. It's all oil, it's all highly processed, and yes, it's high in fat. In fact, it's pretty much 100% fat. And so you want to make sure you're getting foods as grown. But if you have problems, we have our cancer treatment program for you. But better to avoid it. All right, one of the contributions to body fat is the fat you eat. And if you look at your fat in your body, it tends to make hormones. In fact, your fat cells are very good at making hormones. And let me just tell you something about breast cancer. It's nearly impossible to have breast cancer in the absence of hormones. The opposite is true, though. With lots of hormones, you have lots of breast cancer. So obesity is linked to more cancer of the breast. And if a woman is overweight and she gets breast cancer, we can't shut off the estrogen, and so her prognosis is much worse. But it's not just breast cancer that is increased with more fat on your body. It's also cancers, the pancreas, colon, rectum, prostate, endometrium, that's your uterus, gallbladder, cervix, ovary, as well as the breast. So a high-fat diet leading to a high-fat body leads to a high incidence of cancer. And so we sort of want to avoid that. Now I said that those cancer cells like lots of estrogen or lots of hormones. And so let's just look at the role of hormones, say in breast cancer. Anything that increases your exposure to these hormones over your lifetime increases your risk of breast cancer. And so say if you had an abortion and your body sort of wasn't prepared to shut off the hormones when the baby left, your risk of breast cancer goes up. If you are overweight, then especially in your later years, postmenopausally, after your period stop, then you're more likely to have more estrogen and more cancer. If you're willing to take pills to hopefully not have hot flashes, then your risk of cancer goes up. Late menopause, in other words, more years of exposure to this estrogen. And then finally, if your period started earlier than everybody else's. Now, does anybody here remember when in Puerto Rico, girls 8 and 10 were starting their periods and it was on the news? And I see some heads nodding. And when they finally got through with their research, they traced the early periods to excess hormones in the milk and eggs. And so it was animal products. Well, interesting, in the milk and eggs. Well, let's just look at this. Also, does anybody remember around the year 2000 when there was a big argument between Europe and the United States because the Europeans said, don't send your beef over here, keep it home. Anybody remember that? Yeah, well, more than that. It was a lot of hormones. And so let's just look at this, because during this time a lot of research came out to show why the Europeans didn't want our beef products. And the average woman in her 4 quarts of blood has about 9 units of estradiol. At least if she has more than 9, her risk of cancer goes way up. So if we look at 9 units of estradiol as being almost too much, let's look at a European beefsteak here. A European beefsteak would have 4.3 units of estradiol, meaning if you ate 1 steak, you'd raise the amount of estradiol in your entire body by 50%. You'd raise it quite a bit. But that's a European beefsteak. Why were the Europeans not wanting our beef, U.S. beef right here? Well, the U.S. beef for 1 beefsteak would have 20 units. In other words, you go eating that beef and you just tripled the amount of estradiol in your entire body, and thus more than tripling your risk of breast cancer. But what about the milk and eggs? Remember we said the Puerto Rican girls were getting their hormones from milk and eggs? And why is there hormones in milk and eggs? Well, the milk gets it because they give the cows a hormone to make them produce more milk. Oftentimes they give them a cocktail of 3 hormones, but for the milk and eggs, 1 liter of skim milk has 18 units of this cancer-promoting estradiol. And so animal products are the #1 cause of cancer in America, especially as produced in our farming industrial complex. Now, let's go back to these pills that you can take so you don't get hot flashes. I mean, who wants hot flashes? But who wants cancer? And so oral contraceptives increase breast cancer risk in a study of 37,000 European women. And if they were taking hormone replacement for the hot flashes, the risk of endometrial cancer and ovarian cancer go up, and then if you combine it with progesterone, breast cancer goes up. Playing with hormones is playing with fire. As much as they told you it was safe, well, it's not. And you could be paying the price. On the other hand, there are things to help block excess hormones. Anything that is a weak phytoestrogen, meaning a plant source estrogen, will help block the effects of strong either synthetic or natural hormones given to cattle and so forth. So if you want to help block them, things like soy and turmeric and flax and even broccoli and cauliflower and kale, they have estrogenic effects that block the effect of strong estrogens. It goes and fills up the receptor, so the receptor can't be stimulated by estradiol. And so soy helps. Oh yeah, but I heard soy was bad. Well, soy has one serious problem. It's very bad, at least in the eyes of some people. And that is, it poses a significant risk financially to another very vocal industry. They make milk out of soybeans. And so the regular milk people pay off a lot of interesting research to get soy to look bad. All in all, though, the big researchers say if I wanted to avoid cancer, I would eat soy. If I had cancer, I'd eat soy. Soy is the helper, not the cause. And so don't be deceived by some of the false information out there. Now, you don't want genetically modified soy, and we'll get to that here in a bit. But like I said, your cruciferous vegetables also have these estrogenic effects. I mean, they don't worry about you eating a cabbage, do they? And in fact, if you eat cabbage and broccoli and so forth, it increases the amount of estrogens you get out in your urine. So if anybody's fighting menopause, we're going to give you a lot of key things to put in your diet to help you straighten out your hormones and get those hot flashes under control naturally. So let's move on here now and look at some other things other than diet that help. One of those is exercise. Now, how many here get plenty of exercise? Yes, okay, not very many. So if you exercise, what happens, it also helps balance out your hormones. Exercise reduces the amount of estradiol in your serum and other growth factors that originate out of drinking milk, and it reduces your risk of cancer. In fact, people who exercise all the time have half the risk of dying of cancer as those who are out of shape. Now, when I was a medical student, they used to line us all up, and they would take and bring in a patient, and they would say, okay, you come over here and examine the patient. And one time it was my turn, and this patient came in, and I was supposed to check out their leg, and right in the front of their leg, they had a raised purple area. And I looked at that, and I said, well, is it Kaposi sarcoma? And the attending physician said, well, yes, that's right. And then he said, why do you think the patient has that? Well, the usual reason would be HIV infection, AIDS. So I said that, and he says, well, that's a good guess, but no. In fact, this patient has had a kidney transplant, and so that they won't reject the kidney, they are on immunosuppressive drugs. What got me to thinking, you mean anything that wipes out your immune system can make it so you might get cancer? And it's true. Anything that wipes out your immune system. If we look at AIDS, you get AIDS or HIV, it doubles your risk of all cancers. But did you know you can wipe out your immune system with sugar? In fact, when we get to talking about diabetes, anything that will raise a diabetic's blood sugar will raise your risk of cancer.